The city pulsed with life on a sun-drenched summer morning, its streets a vibrant canvas painted with the colors of human activity. Honking cars wove through narrow lanes, their horns blending with the chatter of vendors hawking fruit and flowers, while the shuffle of countless footsteps created a rhythmic undertone. The air was thick with competing scents, warm bread wafting from a bakery, the acrid bite of diesel from idling trucks, and the sweet perfume of roses spilling from a cart. Amid this sensory chaos darted Buddy, a small white puppy whose coat gleamed like fresh snow under the sunlight. Barely a year-old Buddy was a whirlwind of mischief, his bright blue eyes sparkling with uncontainable energy. His fluffy tail wagged like a metronome as he tugged at the leash held loosely by Lila, a 16-year-old girl with a messy ponytail and a smile that radiated warmth. "Buddy, slow down," she laughed, her voice bright with affection as she stumbled to keep up, her sneakers scuffing the cracked pavement. To Lila, the city was a playground, and with Buddy by her side, every step felt like an adventure. The market square they wandered into was a feast for the senses, a bustling hub where the city's heart beat loudest. Stalls lined the cobblestone paths, their awnings shading piles of ruby-red apples, golden loaves of bread, and sizzling skewers of meat that sent savory plumes curling into the air. Shoppers jostled past, their voices a lively hum, while a street musician strummed a cheerful melody on a weathered guitar. Lila's hazel eyes danced with delight as she took it all in, her hand occasionally brushing Buddy's soft fur to anchor herself in the crowd. She paused at a food stall, drawn by the vendor's infectious grin and the promise of a quick snack. "One hot dog, please," she said, fishing coins from her pocket. When the vendor handed her the steaming bun wrapped in wax paper, she knelt beside Buddy, tearing off a small piece. "Just a little, okay? Don't tell Mom," she whispered, her tone conspiratorial. Buddy's pink tongue darted out, snatching the morsel, and his tail wagged so fiercely it seemed he might take flight. Lila's laughter bubbled up, her heart swelling with love for her furry companion. To her, Buddy was more than a pet. He was her confidant, her shadow, the one who greeted her each morning with a joyful leap and a wet-nosed nudge. The crowd thickened as they moved deeper into the market, weaving past a woman balancing a basket of oranges and a child clutching a melting ice cream cone that dripped onto the pavement. Lila's steps were light, her world small and perfect, with Buddy tugging her forward. They stopped near a street performer, a juggler whose flaming torches spun in mesmerizing arcs against the clear blue sky. The crowd gasped and cheered, their applause swelling as the torches soared higher. "Look at that, Buddy, isn't it amazing?" Lila exclaimed, glancing down at her puppy. Buddy yipped, his small body bouncing with excitement, his paws tapping the pavement as if he might join the spectacle. The noise of the market enveloped them, a cocoon of sound that made the moment feel eternal. But eternity shattered with a sharp, explosive bang. A firecracker carelessly lit at a nearby stall, spitting sparks into the air. Buddy's ears flattened, his body trembling with primal fear. Before Lila could tighten her grip, he yanked the leash from her hand, the thin nylon slipping through her fingers like sand.
"Buddy, no!" she shouted, her voice drowned by the market's din as he bolted, a white blur vanishing between legs and carts. Panic surged through Lila, her heart pounding as she shoved through the crowd, elbows bumping strangers, her eyes darting frantically for a glimpse of white fur. "Buddy, come back," she called, her voice cracking with desperation. But the market's chaos mocked her, offering no trace of her puppy. She stumbled into a narrow alley, the noise of the square fading behind her, replaced by the eerie quiet of shadowed walls lined with overflowing trash cans. The air here was damp, heavy with the stench of rot, and the pavement glistened with spilled oil. "Buddy, where are you?" she whispered, her chest tightening with dread. The alley was a dead end, its silence a cruel contrast to the market's vibrancy. Lila spun in place, tears welling, her hands trembling as the reality sank in. He was gone. Her mind replayed the moment the leash slipped, her fingers closing on empty air, and guilt gnawed at her. How could she have let go? She called his name again,
her voice echoing off the brick walls. But the alley offered no answers. Meanwhile, Buddy ran blindly through the city, his small heart racing, the unfamiliar sights and smells overwhelming his senses. His leash snagged on a rusted fence and he tugged free, the collar slipping off and leaving him untethered in a world that suddenly felt vast and hostile. He slowed, panting, his blue eyes wide with confusion as he stood on a strange street, lined with towering buildings and roaring cars. A low whimper escaped him, his sparkling fur already smudged with alley dirt, his playful energy replaced by fear. The city, once a playground of scents and sights, now loomed like a predator, its indifference crushing his small spirit. Back in the market, Lila retraced her steps, her sneakers pounding the pavement, her voice hoarse from shouting. She asked vendors and strangers if they'd seen a white puppy, but their shrugs and sympathetic glances only deepened her despair. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, she trudged home, her face streaked with tears, her hands clutching a stack of flyers she'd printed at a corner shop. Each bore Buddy's picture, his goofy grin, his bright eyes, and the words, "Lost dog, Buddy, white, small, friendly, please call." Lila taped a flyer to a lamppost, her fingers shaking, the tape sticking to her skin in her haste. "I'm so sorry, Buddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll find you, I promise." The flyer fluttered in the evening breeze, joining dozens of others she'd posted across the neighborhood, each a silent plea to the city that had stolen her best friend. That night, Buddy curled up in a dark alley, his small body shivering, behind a pile of sodden cardboard. The air was cold, the ground hard, and a stray cat's hiss from a nearby dumpster made him flinch, his tail tucking tightly against his body. He looked up at the stars, faint pinpricks in the city's glow, and whined softly, the sound swallowed by the distant hum of traffic. The market's warmth, Lila's laughter, the safety of her touch, all felt like a dream slipping away. The city was no longer a place of wonder but a labyrinth of danger, and Buddy, so small and alone, faced its cruelty with only the faint hope that Lila was still out there, looking for him. A year had carved its mark on the city, draining the vibrancy of that long-ago summer and cloaking the streets in a grayer, colder hue. The seasons had turned through autumn's brittle leaves and winter's biting frost, leaving the urban sprawl feeling more like a labyrinth than a playground. Buddy, now 2 years old, was no longer the playful puppy who once darted through markets with a wagging tail and sparkling eyes. His once pristine white fur was matted, streaked with grime, and his ribs pressed sharply against his thin frame, a testament to months of hunger. A faint limp marred his gait, the result of a shard of glass that had sliced his paw in a forgotten alley, leaving a puckered scar. Yet beneath the weariness in his blue eyes, a stubborn flicker of hope endured, a quiet ember of the love he'd known with Lila. On this overcast morning, Buddy nosed through a tipped-over trash can in a narrow alley, the air thick with the sour stench of rot. His stomach growled, a constant ache that drove him to paw through soggy wrappers and crushed cans. He unearthed a moldy bread crust, its edges green but edible, and devoured it in quick, desperate bites, his ears twitching for signs of danger. The city had taught him to be wary, its lessons delivered in bruises and near misses. A sudden guttural bark shattered the silence, and Buddy spun to face a large, mangy stray dog charging from the shadows, its teeth bared in a snarl. Buddy's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his throat, his instincts honed by survival. He dodged as the stray lunged, its jaws snapping inches from his flank, and bolted down the alley, the chase weaving through a maze of crates and puddles, his smaller size his only edge. Slipping under a chain-link fence, he escaped, the stray's frustrated snarls echoing behind him. Panting, Buddy collapsed in a weed-choked lot, his breath clouding in the chilly air as dusk crept in. Rain began to fall, a relentless drizzle that soaked his matted fur and sent shivers through his frail body. He crawled under a rusted car for shelter, the cold metal offering little comfort against the damp ground. In the distance, other strays, a gaunt greyhound with a trembling frame and a scruffy mutt with one clouded eye, watched from the shadows, their gazes wary but not hostile. Buddy met their eyes, his tail still, too cautious to approach. He curled up tightly, his mind drifting to a warmer memory. Lila's backyard, bathed in golden sunlight, where he'd chased a red ball she tossed, her laughter a melody that made his heart soar. "You're the best, buddy. Always will be," she'd said, her fingers scratching his ears until he melted into her touch. The memory faded, and the rain pounded harder, pulling him back to the bleak present. His whine was soft, swallowed by the city's hum, but the image of Lila's face lingered, a lifeline he clung to despite the growing weight of his solitude. The lot was a graveyard of broken things, shattered bottles, twisted metal, dreams discarded, and Buddy felt like one of them, small and forgotten in a world that cared little for strays. Miles away, Lila, now 17, stood in her bedroom, the walls a patchwork of faded flyers and maps pinned with red tacks marking every place she'd searched. Her hazel eyes, shadowed by sleepless nights, scanned a local lost pets forum on her laptop. She typed a new post, her fingers steady despite the ache in her chest. "Still looking for Buddy White Dog, lost 1 year ago. Please share." She hit send, then leaned back, her gaze falling on a photo on her nightstand, her and Buddy in the park, his tongue lolling in a goofy grin. "I'm not giving up," she whispered, her voice firm. Downstairs, her mother Maria watched from the kitchen, worry etching lines into her face. "Lila, dinner's ready," she called, but Lila didn't move, her focus locked on her screen. Maria sighed, knowing her daughter's heart was out there wandering the streets with her lost friend. Lila's days were a blur of routine. School, then hours combing neighborhoods, taping flyers to lampposts and asking strangers if they'd seen a small white dog. Each dead end was a small wound, but she pressed on, driven by a love that refused to fade. That afternoon she visited a shelter, her heart leaping at the sight of a white dog in a kennel. But as she approached, the dog's brown eyes met hers, not Buddy's bright blue. "Sorry, kid," the worker said gently. Lila nodded, swallowing tears, and left another flyer, her hope dented but unbroken. Back in the city, Buddy roamed a park, his movements deliberate despite the hunger gnawing at him. The grass was patchy, littered with wrappers, but a picnic caught his eye. A family eating at a table, a child dropping a sandwich. Buddy crept closer, his nose twitching at the scent of ham. "Mommy, look! A dog!" the child exclaimed, pointing. The mother shooed him away, tossing a stick that clattered near his paws. Buddy flinched, retreating to scavenge the crumbs they left behind, his eyes scanning the park not for food but for Lila, a habit he couldn't break. On a busy street, he dodged cars, unaware of a woman watching him. She pulled a faded flyer from her purse, comparing Buddy's face to the photo. "Hey, little guy, are you Buddy?" she asked, dialing Lila's number. But a honking car spooked him, and he bolted before she could reach him, his small form disappearing into an alley. At Lila's house, her phone rang and she answered, hope surging. "A white dog? Where?" she asked, scribbling an address. She rushed to the area, calling Buddy's name, but found only empty streets. Her shoulders slumped, yet she taped a new flyer to a pole, her determination a fire that refused to die. Back in the lot, Buddy huddled under the car, the rain unrelenting. The greyhound and mutt lingered nearby, their presence a quiet reminder of the life he now led. He closed his eyes, the ache of Lila's absence sharper than the cold, and dreamed of her voice, her touch, the home he feared he'd never find again. The city slept, but Buddy's heart whispered that somewhere, Lila was still searching, her love a beacon he could almost feel through the dark. 2 years had etched their mark on Lila, now 18, her once carefree spirit tempered by an ache that never fully faded. Her bedroom was a testament to her unyielding hope, its walls a collage of weathered flyers, maps crisscrossed with red marker, and photos of Buddy, his playful grin frozen in moments that felt like another lifetime. She sat cross-legged on her bed, the glow of her laptop casting shadows across her tired face as she scrolled through a local lost pets forum. Her hazel eyes, shadowed by countless sleepless nights, scanned posts for any hint of a small white dog. She typed a new message, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her heart. Still looking for Buddy, white dog. Lost 2 years ago. Last seen near downtown. Please share. She hit send, then leaned back, her gaze drifting to a framed photo on her nightstand. Her and Buddy in the park, his tongue lolling happily as she hugged him tight. "I'm not giving up," she whispered, her voice a quiet vow to the empty room. Downstairs, her mother, Maria, stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup, her brow furrowed with worry. "Lila, dinner's ready," she called, but the lack of response was no surprise. Maria sighed, her heart heavy for the daughter whose life had become a cycle of school and searching, each day a battle against the fear that Buddy was gone forever. Lila's routine was relentless. Classes, then hours combing neighborhoods, taping flyers to lampposts and asking strangers if they'd seen her dog. Each dead end was a small fracture in her hope, yet she pressed on, driven by a love that burned brighter than despair. The city, meanwhile, had become Buddy's crucible, its streets a proving ground where survival demanded cunning and resilience. No longer the trembling puppy of that first lonely night, he moved with a quiet purpose, his matted fur a patchwork of dirt and scars, his blue eyes still carrying that stubborn flicker of hope. His ribs were less prominent now, thanks to scraps, scavenged from dumpsters and the occasional kindness of strangers, but hunger was a constant companion. In a vacant lot strewn with broken glass and twisted metal, Buddy encountered familiar faces, the gaunt greyhound and scruffy mutt from months past, now joined by a limping terrier with a patchy coat. They shared a chicken bone scavenged from a trash heap, their chewing a silent truce born of necessity. Buddy's gaze softened as he watched them, a flicker of compassion stirring within him. These strays were no longer just rivals for food. They were companions in this brutal world, bound by the shared weight of abandonment. The lot was a desolate place, its weeds clawing through cracked pavement, but in their quiet company, Buddy felt a fleeting sense of belonging. A memory surfaced, Lila's gentle hands tossing a ball, her laughter warming the air. But it was fainter now, like a song heard through a closed door. He whined softly, nudging the terrier closer to share his warmth, his heart clinging to the fading image of home. Lila's search took her to a shelter that afternoon, a squat building filled with the anxious barks of caged dogs. Her heart leapt at the sight of a white dog in a kennel, its fur tangled but familiar. She approached, holding her breath, but as the dog turned, its brown eyes met hers, not Buddy's bright blue. Her shoulders sagged, the disappointment, physical weight. "Sorry, kid," the shelter worker said, her voice kind but tired. Lila nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and handed over a flyer, her fingers lingering on the paper as if it could summon Buddy back. "Please, if you see him," she trailed off, unable to finish. Outside, she leaned against the shelter's brick wall, the autumn wind biting her cheeks, and let a single tear fall. But despair was a luxury she couldn't afford. She straightened, pulling her jacket tighter, and headed to the next neighborhood, her backpack heavy with flyers and treats she carried just in case. Her phone buzzed with a message. Saw a white dog near the old warehouse district. Her pulse quickened. Ignoring the ache in her legs, she hailed a bus, her mind racing with possibilities. The warehouse district was a maze of crumbling buildings and littered streets, the air heavy with dust and decay. She called Buddy's name, her voice echoing off rusted walls, her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering dusk. A flash of white caught her eye, a plastic bag caught in the wind. Her heart sank, but she kept searching, unwilling to let the night win. Across the city, Buddy roamed the same district, unaware of Lila's proximity. He led his small pack, the greyhound, mutt, and terrier, through an alley, their steps cautious, but synchronized. A kind old man on a park bench tossed him a scrap of bread, his weathered face crinkling with a smile. Buddy hesitated, his tail wagging faintly, but as the man reached out, memories of harsh hands made him flinch. He ate quickly and retreated, the man's gentle voice calling after him. The terrier limped beside him, its breathing labored, and Buddy slowed, nudging it gently, his eyes scanning the shadows for threats. The city was quieter here, its pulse subdued, but danger lurked in every corner. A memory flickered. Lila's voice promising treats, her hands warm against his fur, and his whine was soft, the ache of her absence sharper than hunger. Back at home, Lila returned mud-caked and exhausted, her sneakers leaving smears on the porch. Maria met her at the door, pulling her into a hug. "You're killing yourself, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lila buried, her face in her mother's shoulder, her body trembling. "I can't stop, Mom. He's waiting for me." Maria nodded, tears in her eyes, and handed Lila a mug of tea. As Lila sipped it, her phone pinged. Another tip, this time near the river. She stood, resolve hardening. "I'll go tomorrow," she said, her voice steady. In the alley, Buddy curled up beside the terrier, the greyhound and mutt nearby, their warmth a small shield against the cold. He lifted his head, ears twitching at a distant sound, his heart whispering that somewhere, Lila was still searching. The city slept, but their bond, though strained by time and distance, held fast, a fragile thread stretching across the dark. The city hummed under a late afternoon sun, its streets alive with the familiar rhythm of honking cars and hurried footsteps. Lila, now 18, drove her rattling old sedan through the urban sprawl, her hands gripping the wheel as the radio played a soft tune she barely heard. 2 years and 3 months had passed since Buddy vanished, and the weight of that loss had carved quiet lines into her once carefree face. Her hazel eyes, though tired, still held a spark of determination, her mind drifting to memories of Buddy's playful barks and the warm weight of him curled in her lap. She stopped at a red light, her fingers tapping the steering wheel, the world outside a blur of pedestrians and bikes. Then something caught her eye, a skinny white dog trembling by the roadside, half hidden in the shadow of a dented mailbox. His fur was dull, his frame frail, but his eyes, bright blue, locked on her car, were unmistakable. Lila's breath caught, her heart lurching as if the ground had shifted beneath her. The dog's tail gave a hesitant wag, a tentative gesture that seemed to carry years of longing. Then, as if struck by lightning, he bolted forward, weaving through traffic with a desperate grace, stopping in front of her car. His tail wagged wildly now, his body shaking with emotion, his eyes pleading, "It's me. I'm here. Don't you recognize me?" Lila stared, disbelief rooting her to the seat, tears blurring her vision. It was Buddy, thinner, weaker, older, but undeniably him. Her hands trembled as she flung open the car door, ignoring the impatient honks from drivers behind her. She stumbled onto the pavement, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Buddy." The word was a prayer, a hope she'd carried through countless empty searches. She dropped to her knees, arms open, tears streaming down her face as the reality crashed over her. Her dog, her heart, was here, alive. But Buddy hesitated, his eyes flickering with a wariness born of the streets. His tail slowed, his body tensing as if unsure whether this was a dream that might dissolve. Lila's heart sank, confusion mingling with joy. Had the city changed? Him so much? She reached into the car, fumbling for a bag of treats she always carried, her fingers shaking as she held out a biscuit. "It's me, Buddy. It's okay," she said softly, her voice trembling with love. Buddy inched closer, his nose twitching at the familiar scent, his eyes searching hers for the girl he'd lost. He took the treat, his teeth grazing her fingers, and for a moment the world shrank to just the two of them, the girl and her dog reunited against all odds. Lila sobbed, a sound of relief and heartbreak, her hand hovering over his matted fur, afraid to touch and break the fragile moment. But then, something unexpected happened. Shadows moved behind Buddy, and 3 more dogs emerged from the alley, a gaunt greyhound, a scruffy mutt, and a limping terrier, their eyes hollow with hunger but fixed on Buddy with a quiet trust. Lila froze, her breath catching as the strays stepped into the light, their presence a sudden weight. Buddy turned to them, then back to her, his eyes seeming to say, "Please, they need help too." The moment shattered her, a wave of emotion crashing through her as she realized Buddy hadn't just survived. He'd found others, protected them, carried them with him. These were his family now, bound by the street's harsh lessons, and he was asking her to see them, to save them. Lila knelt on the sidewalk, tears streaming as she opened the bag of treats and scattered them on the ground. The strays hesitated, their instincts warring with hunger, but Buddy's gentle nudge urged them forward. They ate cautiously, their thin bodies trembling while Buddy kept glancing at Lila, his eyes wide with fear that this might vanish, that she might leave again. Lila's heart ached at his uncertainty, her fingers itching to pull him close, but she stayed still, letting them eat, letting him trust. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, though she knew he couldn't understand the words. She reached out slowly, her hand brushing his fur, and Buddy leaned into her touch, a soft whine escaping him. The contact was electric, a bridge across 2 years of loss, and Lila sobbed harder, her fingers tracing the scars and dirt that marked his journey. The city faded around them, the honks and shouts distant as Lila sat with the 4 dogs, their quiet eating a fragile ritual of trust. The greyhound's ribs were stark, the mutt's clouded eye unseeing, the terrier's limp painful to watch. Yet they ate with a dignity that broke Lila's heart. She thought of the flyers, the sleepless nights, the endless searches, and now here was Buddy, not alone but with these broken souls who'd become his own. Her mind raced. How would she care for them? Her car was small, her family's house, modest, but the thought of leaving them behind was unthinkable. Buddy had brought them to her, entrusted them to her, and she would not fail him. She pulled more food from her car, a half-eaten sandwich and a bottle of water she poured into a crumpled cup, her hands moving with purpose. The strays watched her, their wariness easing, and Buddy stayed close, his body pressed against her knee as if anchoring himself to her presence. Lila looked into his eyes, seeing the puppy he'd been and the survivor he'd become, and her resolve hardened. "I'm not leaving you again," she said, her voice steady now, a promise to all 4. The red light turned green, then red again, the city moving on. But Lila remained, kneeling on the pavement, surrounded by dogs who'd known nothing but hardship. In that moment, she felt the weight of their future, the challenge of what came next, but also the certainty that this was right. Buddy's tail wagged faintly, his eyes never leaving her, and Lila knew that whatever it took, they were going home, together. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the city as Lila sat on the sidewalk, surrounded by Buddy and his 3 stray companions, the gaunt greyhound, the scruffy mutt, and the limping terrier. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of exhaust and blooming jasmine from a nearby planter. But Lila's world had narrowed to the dogs before her. Buddy pressed against her knee, his matted fur warm under her hand, his blue eyes fixed on her with a trust that felt both fragile and unbreakable. The other strays ate the last of the scattered treats, their thin bodies trembling with cautious hope, their eyes darting between Lila and Buddy as if seeking permission to believe in this moment. Lila's heart swelled, a mix of joy and responsibility settling over her. She had found Buddy after 2 years and 3 months of searching, but he hadn't come alone. He'd brought these broken souls, his family forged in the crucible of the streets, and their presence was a silent plea she couldn't ignore. Her car idled nearby, its door still open, and the honks of impatient drivers had faded as the traffic light cycled through its colors. Lila stroked Buddy's head, her fingers tracing the scars hidden beneath his fur, and whispered, "We're going home." The words were a vow, not just to him but to the greyhound, mutt, and terrier whose hollow gazes stirred a fierce determination in her. She didn't know how she'd manage, but she knew she would, not for herself, but for them. Lila stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and opened the back door of her sedan. The car was small, its seats worn and cluttered with flyers and water bottles, but it would have to do. She coaxed Buddy first, patting the seat and offering a gentle smile. "Come on, Buddy," she said, her voice soft but steady. Buddy hesitated, his ears twitching, then leapt onto the seat, his tail wagging faintly as he sniffed the familiar scent of her jacket. The other dogs watched, their bodies tense, and Lila knelt again, holding out her hand. The greyhound stepped forward first, its long legs trembling, and sniffed her fingers before climbing in, curling tightly against Buddy. The mutt followed, its clouded eye unseeing but its nose guiding it, and finally the terrier, its limp slowing its climb, but Lila lifted it gently, her arms trembling with the weight of its trust. She closed the door, her heart racing as she slid into the driver's seat, glancing back at the 4 dogs huddled together. Buddy's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in years, Lila felt whole, the ache of his absence, replaced by the warmth of his presence. She drove slowly, the city's lights blurring past, her mind racing with logistics, food, vet visits, space in her family's modest house. But each worry was tempered by the certainty that this was right. The dogs were quiet, their breathing a soft rhythm, and Lila reached back to rest her hand on Buddy's head, anchoring herself to the moment. At home, the porch light glowed as Lila pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight both comforting and daunting. Maria stood at the door, her silhouette framed by the warm light, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as Lila opened the car door and 4 dogs spilled out. "Lila, what?" Maria began, but her words faltered as she saw Buddy, thinner and dirtier but unmistakable, nudging Lila's leg. Tears welled in Maria's eyes, and she knelt, her hands hovering over Buddy as Lila nodded, her own eyes glistening. "It's him, Mom. And these, they're with him," Lila said, gesturing to the strays who stood close together, wary of the new surroundings. Maria's gaze softened, understanding dawning as she took in their frail forms. "Oh, honey," she murmured, pulling Lila into a hug. Together, they led the dogs inside, the strays hesitating at the threshold, their paws unaccustomed to the warmth of a home. Lila spread blankets on the living room floor, creating a makeshift den, and filled bowls with water and kibble from an old bag kept for stray cats. The dogs ate hungrily, their tails wagging faintly, and Buddy stayed close to Lila, his body relaxed for the first time in years. Maria watched, her initial shock giving way to pride. "This is a lot, Lila," she said, her voice gentle. "I know, Mom, but they need us," Lila replied, her resolve unshaken. Maria nodded, squeezing her shoulder, and together they sat, watching the dogs settle, the house filled with the quiet sounds of their breathing. The days that followed were a whirlwind of care and adjustment. Lila took the dogs to a vet, her savings dwindling but her heart full as she learned their needs. Flea baths, vaccinations, a splint for the terrier's leg. She named them. Grace for the greyhound, whose elegance shone despite her hunger. Patch for the mutt, his clouded eye a badge of survival. And Tinker for the terrier, whose stubborn spirit defied her limp. Buddy, though, remained Buddy, his name, a tether to the past and a promise for the future. The house became a sanctuary, its small backyard a playground where Buddy chased a ball again, his limp fading with each day of care. Grace loped beside him, her long legs stretching while Patch and Tinker watched, their trust growing. Lila spent hours brushing their fur, her hands gentle as she coaxed out mats and whispered reassurances. At night, they curled together on the blankets, Buddy always closest to Lila, his head resting on her knee. Maria helped, cooking extra food and rearranging furniture, her initial doubts replaced by love for the dogs who'd brought her daughter's smile back. Lila's friends pitched in, donating old toys and bowls, and the community, touched by her story, shared her posts online, turning her reunion with Buddy into a small beacon of hope. As weeks turned to months, the dogs transformed. Buddy's fur regained its snowy sheen, his eyes bright with the joy Lila remembered. Grace filled out, her ribs no longer stark. Patch's tail wagged freely, his wariness easing, and Tinker bounded after toys, her limp a minor quirk. Lila watched them play, her heart swelling with a love that encompassed not just Buddy but all four, their survival a testament to resilience and trust. She thought of the streets, the cold alleys, the hunger they'd endured, and vowed they'd never face that again. The flyers came down, replaced by photos of the dogs sprawled on the couch, their eyes soft with contentment. Lila knelt beside Buddy one evening, her fingers tracing his ears as she whispered, "You brought us all home." He licked her hand, his tail thumping, and Lila knew this was their future. A family forged not just by blood but by choice, bound by a love that had defied time and hardship. The city outside hummed on, but within these walls, Buddy, Grace, Patch, and Tinker were safe, their days of fighting for survival over, their home a haven where love was the only rule.